everyone. It's Sal and Sue here from our very remote locations. We're here to bring you a very special series of videos. These are going to be a little different from our Summer Victory Garden tutorial videos. Instead, we are going to introduce you to several experienced backyard gardeners. We're going to hear their stories about gardening, cooking, and maybe even learn some tips and tricks for new or returning gardeners. So join us in our first installment of the Winter Victory Garden video series, our Conversations with Backyard Gardeners. Can you share your name, where you live, town and state, and how many years you have been gardening for?
My name is Haley Diem. I live in Duluth, Minnesota. I'm a recent transplant. Lived here about 1 year, and 17 years I've been gardening.
My name is Susan Daggett, and I live in rural New Richmond, and I've been gardening for 47 years. Well, formally. I helped my mom as a kid.
My name is Ted Siklai, and I live in Kensington, Maryland, outside of Washington, D.C. And I've been gardening, I can't do the math, but since the early 90s.
30 years.
So I would say almost 30 years.
I'm Barb Catt, and I live outside of Frederick, Wisconsin now. And I have been gardening for 40 years.
My name is Steve Shellhorn, and I live in Somerset, Wisconsin. And I have been gardening, I hate to think about how many years, but I would say I've been gardening for at least 20 years.
I'm Kathy Lunderville, and I live rural Amory, about 3 miles southwest of Little Falls, not very far from the Hungry Turtle Farm, near Whetstone, if you know where that is. And then I have been gardening pretty much all my life. I started with my mom, and then there were periods when I didn't garden, but most of the time I have had a garden of one sort or another.
Growing up, would you consider yourself a gardener? And was anybody else in your family really big into gardening?
My grandpa was the major gardener in the family. They had about 5 acres. It was beautiful. It was just like a park, like an arboretum. And they had come over from Denmark, and then they moved out to what was the country at that time, right before the Depression hit. They were newly married, and they had to garden to live then because there was just not enough food to, there wasn't money. It was the Depression. So my grandma said it was that the gardens and that they could have chickens that kept them alive.
So I'd say that after my experience at this camp, it was called Children's Farm, I became the most avid gardener in my family. My mom always had like flower gardens and did landscaping, but I was really into growing food. So she helped me clear an area in our backyard and helped me get the bedding plants from the greenhouse. And yeah, that was my first garden. I was 12.
My mother did some gardening. The only thing that I remember that she grew was something called a cheese pumpkin, a Long Island cheese pumpkin, which was shaped like a wheel of cheese. And somewhere along the line, she had been told it was the best kind of pumpkin to grow for pumpkin pie. So I do remember we had cheese pumpkins growing in the side yard, but we weren't a particularly gardening family other than that.
My dad gardened. My mom, she didn't garden too much, but she was more the processor of what we had gotten from the garden, the fruits and vegetables. But we had started off, watching my dad garden, and it kind of took off from there. Got away from it for some years when I was really a young man, going after different things. I just didn't have a place to garden. But yeah, it's kind of been in the family and just kind of was passed on.
My mom, and we gardened with my mom because we were the help. We picked the beans and we weeded and we did all those things, but I enjoyed it. I liked all that stuff. And we, as a family, I have 6 brothers and sisters, and we lived on a farm. So we we gardened for food production. It wasn't to make a beautiful garden, it was to make food.
When and why did you start gardening?
I started gardening in the early 90s, having recently moved to Vermont and living in a pretty rural place where there was already a lot of gardening going on. So seemed like a logical thing to do and just a nice thing to do to sort of be outside and enjoy where I was.
I think it actually started out with dealing with grief, because, you know, I had always admired my grandpa as a gardener, you know, and I would always do some gardening, but as far as getting serious, my grandma was in the hospital with cancer. I think it was the year after I got out of high school, and the doctor said that she probably wouldn't make it, and I was grief stricken, did not know how to deal with it very well. And so I thought of gardening because I love to be outside. Always was the kid that was outside, playing outside. So I thought that would help me. And so I dug out the garden by hand in this thick Illinois sod and planted my first garden. And it did help. It helped. I thought a lot when I was gardening and just kind of considered the circle of life and all that kind of thing. And had a great first year garden, had enough to share with my family, and my grandma made it out of the hospital and lived quite a few years afterwards.
I think it was a sense of wonder that you seem to have more access to when you're younger. So it's just really like this amazement and curiosity that you can grow your own food. So I wasn't necessarily motivated as I am now to grow my own food and eat my own food. It was more like just amazement that I could make this magical process happen.
I started gardening as a college student. It went hand in hand with my decision to get a philosophy major, which I knew was never going to provide a living. So I said, I am going to live by the work of my hands. And one of the first things to do was to get serious about gardening.
When I was young, it was being outside and just walking in the garden and picking a little cherry tomato and just eating it. And to me, it was magical. Gardening for me, over the years, has been everything from magical, you know, from what you get out of it, but it's been therapy, and it's also been connection. You know, feeling a part of something else, to have a connection really to the earth. You know, getting your hands in that dirt and just the feeling of digging in with your hands, especially when you have a good dirt that's not like rock hard clay. You know, you just reach in there and you're weeding and you're tending another life and being a part of it and helping it grow. And that's part of the magic as well, is just the impact you can have and what you can do.
What do you love to cook from what you grow? And is there, something from the summer and something from the winter? Is it different?
I would say tomatoes are an obvious thing that I like to cook with. But I also, really appreciate growing lettuce and just having kind of fresh, and radishes and other things that sort of are usable without cooking. So yeah, and I don't end up growing a lot that lasts into the winter. So there's not a whole lot of winter cooking. One thing that I do grow a lot of is Swiss chard, partially because it's like super easy. It kind of grows itself. It's really nice to grow because it survives both cool and warm weather pretty well. I can plant a couple feet of Swiss chard and harvest out of it pretty much all summer and into the fall. So it's probably about one of the easiest things to grow. And there's just a kind of a basic Swiss chard frittata basic thing that I cook a lot of. So that can be both fresh, but also that's one of the things that I do regularly: chop up and freeze, blanch and freeze, and use during the winter.
Oh yeah, for the first couple months of gardening season, I kind of live off of salads because I just grow every kind of salad type thing that you could grow. And every day, just bring it in, wash it, and have a salad, and just throw in nuts and whatever else I have sitting around. So yeah, that's pretty much salads. And then it kind of moves on, you know, to the more complicated things later on. And then towards the end of the season, you got the potatoes and all that kind of stuff coming in.
I love to eat fresh out of my garden in the summer. And then, so my answer there is sweet corn.
Yeah.
And then I put food up, and then I enjoy cooking more from the food that I've put up. In the summer, I like it raw, mostly salads and raw peas and fresh broccoli salads and corn.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's sort of my pattern with the summer, with the garden.
Any particular winter, you know, thing that you like to make from the things you've put up?
Well, every couple of years I make a bunch of sauerkraut out of cabbages, and I love my own rutabagas. They taste so nice and mild, so those go in stews and pasties and dishes like that for quite a while. That's really fun.
I enjoy everything from the garden. We eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, and I like it all.
You like it all? Yeah.
Yeah, I like it all. And I like to cook, so it all gets used.
So I love to get inspired based off what my garden is producing. So I wouldn't say that I have one specific vegetable that I like to cook with, but I really like that puzzle of trying to figure out what to make based off what my garden has produced that week. So coming home, I guess some go-tos when you have a lot of cucumbers and tomatoes is like a fresh Greek salad with Kalamata olives and feta, and just a light like olive oil and vinaigrette dressing is just delicious. You'll look forward to that every summer, especially with the ripe tomatoes. That's probably one of the most exciting vegetables when it finally comes in, is the ripe tomatoes. Oh, one of our favorite go-tos, we always have kale and collards going constantly. And I love making collards and bacon out of the collards. That's like a weekly meal that we have when we have collards that are growing, and we try and freeze some to put away for the winter and fall too. We have a lot of storage squash. Something that I've been making a lot lately is a butternut squash curry. It's super delicious. I put like coconut milk and red lentils and crushed tomatoes from the summer in there and eat that over rice. It's really great. I've also been making this oatmeal dish out of roasted squash that has steel cut oats and ginger and cinnamon and coconut oil. And that's been really like warming and nutritious for the cold mornings.
There's so much I like, and I think it's a seasonal thing. So like in the spring, I really like going out there, and I'll walk in my garden and I'll see the asparagus heads starting to come up. And then from that, it goes into the next vegetable, the next fruit that ripens. And each flavor is so different and delicious in its own right. Two things that come to mind. One is blueberries. We have a really big blueberry harvest, and so throughout the winter, we will pull the blueberries out of the freezer, and they freeze very well. Very easy to grow. They're awesome. So if I can put a plug in for blueberries for anybody watching.
Do you preserve a lot of your produce?
Yes. Yep. I freeze certain things that I like frozen, green beans and corn and raspberries and those kinds of things. And then I can some tomatoes, tomato juice more than anything else. And I make pickles, different things. And then I dry a lot of tomatoes. I really like dried tomatoes for things.
Who taught you how to preserve it? Or is that something you did with your mom, or?
Yeah, my mom taught me a lot, and then I did a lot of reading when I wanted to learn more and I wasn't around home to ask her questions.
I do like, I like freezing the best, plus it tastes really good. The drying is okay, but that's more time consuming. And of course, just root cellaring, the root cellar vegetables, as long as you eat them fast enough, they don't sprout, but probably freezing. just because, and of course that was what I learned, because my mom and I, we did actually freeze tons and tons of stuff together when I had my garden. And we'd also go to the farmers markets and pick fruits and things. And then we would just freeze them all, you know, cut them up, preserve them, and freeze them together. So that's probably how I got into freezing, is my favorite thing. But I still preserve a lot of the tomato sauces. I like to have a lot of that. I love anything with like a red sauce. So spaghetti, chili, lasagna, anything like that would probably be my favorite.
There's a couple things I pretty commonly freeze. Swiss chard, just because it just, I don't know, I just like it. The other thing that I've been doing a lot of is drying tomatoes to like semi sun-dried tomatoes and then freezing those so they're not dried down to the point that they're like you could leave them out at room temperature. But if I just kind of dry them down to about to a third of their like original kind of moisture level and then freeze them, they're just really great to pull out and use in the winter. So those are probably the two biggest things that I do. And then I do grow some onions and potatoes, so when those turn out pretty well, and garlic, those could just be stored. I like to keep those. So
do you have a special way that you store the potatoes, onions, garlic, or not really?
In the basement in a plastic tray, and just hope that they don't sprout too quickly.
Yeah, we try to preserve as much as possible. It's always a goal to fill the freezer by the end of the fall. So we do have a full freezer. It's full of roasted tomatoes, summer squash and zucchini, corn, peppers, bell peppers, Carmen peppers, hot peppers, pesto. We have frozen pesto. We also make salsa every year. So we made about a dozen jars of salsa, and also like to make canned marinara. Most of our garden was tomatoes this last year, so lots of canned tomato products.
Freezing. I always think of the blueberries. It's just so easy to just, wash them off lightly and throw them in the freezer practically. Where you set up a tray, wax paper, lay everything out separate, and then freeze it, and then get a Ziploc bag, and then take them all off the wax paper so that they're all frozen loose. Because if you throw them all in a bag and just freeze them, you're going to have a solid chunk. And so what you want to do is freeze them separate, put them all together. So when you use them, whether it's blueberries, cherries, if you're freezing beets, you can pull them out and just, out of the bag a little bit at a time and use them and put the rest of them back in.
I've sort of switched to freezing and drying from canning, but the most important way that I preserve my food is in a cold room or root cellar. Like I've always found a way to have a space that's between 40 and 50 degrees that you can regulate the moisture a little bit. And some places I've lived, you have to like shuffle it from the garage under a blanket to a porch or whatever as winter sets in. But that's the primary way that I keep my food, is carrots in buckets of sand, and potatoes, and cabbages even, and onions, squash. So you can get yourself all the way through till April with that food.
Well, that was really fun to hear everybody's experiences. And I think for me, especially to hear some people talk about their preservation techniques and some of the things that they're doing with their produce out of their gardens. Do you have any special kind of preservation techniques that you use, Sal?
Yeah, I actually brought a few samples. One of my favorite ways to preserve things, in addition to, of course, freezing, which is by far the easiest way to do it, I really like to dry things. So I've got some beans. I've been growing my own dried beans for a couple years now, and it's super fun to just see all the different varieties and just be able to pop them in a dehydrator for just an hour or two after I harvest them, just to make sure they're bone dry, pop them in a can and they don't take up any space in the fridge or the freezer. I like to do dried herbs, and I like to experiment. This is my first year drying okra. So it's just pretty cool because it's a little bit of labor up front, and then you've just, like people are saying, you've just got this stuff ready to eat with all the fresh summer flavors in the dead of winter.
Yeah. I used to do a lot more dehydrating and I kind of got away from it, but this series has actually reminded me how much I like dehydrating. And so now I think I'm going to have to get back in it. I think one of my favorites too was red peppers. I don't know. So for some reason, like
Mm.
dehydrated red peppers are really good. I used to do a lot of canning and I've kind of gotten away from that. I feel like now I'm mostly am eating like storage crops. But I don't know, definitely got to get the dehydrator out again.
It was really cool to hear just everybody's stories of how they got into gardening too. Just really interesting to hear how many people started at, you know, a younger age. And some people kind of picked it up later on, but really it seems like it's something that you start doing around the beginning of adulthood and it just kind of sticks with you.
Yeah, it's really, I think, extraordinary, like how much collective experience those 6 gardeners have. I think I added it up. It was like over 200 years or something of experience. You know, it's kind of crazy. But
That's
yeah, it
amazing.
does seem like that was sort of a theme, like people, right, they started it in young adulthood and just kept at it.
Yeah, so we're going to be doing a couple videos this winter just to keep everybody engaged and thinking about gardening. So in another couple of weeks, we're going to do our next video, and it is going to, we're going to be talking to the same group of gardeners. They're going to be telling us a little bit more about how they're planning for their next year's garden, how they go about just going through their seed catalogs and kind of strategizing what the next year is going to bring. So
Yeah, and that one will be coming out on February 4th. And we'll be hosting a new video every 2 weeks on Thursday nights. So you can be looking forward to that.
all right, everybody. We hope you enjoyed this and you're coming back to join us in a couple weeks. Make sure to like this video if you want to see more content like it. Otherwise, if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, you can subscribe to the Farm Table channel to get lots more videos on other gardening and other cooking topics. And we're going to link you back to last year's full series of Victory Garden video tutorials in case you want to review any and learn a little bit more and get ready for next year's garden.
Yeah, so thanks so much for joining us. See you in a few weeks.
Yeah.